name is Gina Lowe, and I am the Domestic Violence Prevention Educator and Community Outreach Coordinator at Domestic Violence Services of Snohomish County. Today, we're going to discuss what is consent. So, first of all, we're going to talk about examples of consent and how to ask for consent, because that is a very important thing. If you want physical contact with someone or to do something with someone or share someone's information, it's important to ask for consent and to respect another person's boundaries. So the first thing I'm going to have us do is imagine we are wanting to go to our friend's house. And this is a place where we feel the most comfortable. It's a very intimate part of our lives or our living quarters. So first of all, you might ring the doorbell and someone comes to answer, possibly your friend or their parent, and you explain who you are and you wanted to see your friend and say hi. And if that person feels comfortable, usually they'll invite you and they'll be like, oh, of course, come on in. And that's really a sign that that person consented to let you into their house. And then next is maybe keeping your shoes on or taking off your shoes. You can ask, would you feel more comfortable if I took my shoes off? Because a lot of folks might want people to take shoes off in their household, maybe because for cultural reasons or maybe because of cleanliness. I know one thing is during the pandemic, a lot of folks might want to take their shoes off because it can spread the virus. So that's something that's really important to ask. And that person will usually say, yes, please take your shoes off if you want to, or feel free to keep your shoes on. Recognize that this example might not be as relevant for the pandemic right now because you might not be going over to people's houses as often. That might not be within your immediate family or within a COVID bubble. But for the sake of this, pretend that this isn't the pandemic. Another thing is going into different rooms. Maybe you want to check out your friend's room. Maybe they just automatically say, hey, let's go up to my room, hang out. And that's a sign that that person consented because they enthusiastically were like, hey, they're the first ones that brought it up, especially if they're the first ones who brought it up and they sound enthusiastic about it. They'll invite you up to their room or to see maybe their new rug and things like that, or maybe their new twinkle lights. They did a new thing decorating their room, so that can be a really exciting thing. Or maybe their gaming setup, you want to check that out. So usually you'll ask because, you know, consent is not implied that when you come into someone's house or into their living room area, because maybe the door leads into the living room area, that it's not implied that, oh, you can go into different parts of the house. Usually you're kind of more wary about going into their parents' house or their study or something like that. So that's a really important kind of sign of like that ongoing kind of consent. And then maybe you want to play their new game on their Nintendo Switch. They told you they just got Animal Crossing, or maybe they wanted to play Mario Kart or something like that. But usually you don't just pick up someone's Nintendo Switch and just start playing it without making sure it's okay with the person who owns it. So, you know, saying, hey, you want to play Switch or something, or you want to play Mario Kart or Smash Brothers. And so that's the kind of an example that we're used to. It's kind of implied in everyday life that we have these norms, these boundaries that we know we have to be careful about crossing and making sure that the other person is okay with it. And also, when is it time to leave? Do you still feel welcome in the house? Do you think that the other person kind of wants you to leave at this point because they have other things to do? Maybe their parents are kind of sending signals, you know, oh, you know, like, would you like some leftovers before you go? Kind of being able to say, hey, you know, how long is it okay for me to stay for? Establishing that before you leave. Because if you're always kind of reading into people's nonverbal cues or kind of passive aggressive things, then that's not really always good. But always saying, hey, you know, how long can I stay? Are you doing anything today? Being considerate of that, because sometimes they might not want to just kick you out, but they kind of need to because they have some stuff to do. Maybe they have an appointment later today. Um, so I hope that example kind of helps you put into perspective because that's something that we understand on an important level, but consent in Washington state law is really important to look at because this is the one that you need to really understand to avoid committing sexual assault or a crime. So consent means that at the time of the act of sexual intercourse or sexual contact, there are actual words or conduct indicating a freely given agreement. So I think a really important part of this to read into is the actual words or conduct. So actual words could be like, yes, I would like to have sex with you, or I love to hold your hand. And it doesn't have to be so blatant like that. I know it can be kind of jarring, but you can sense in their conduct as well, like they're enthusiastic, they're excited, maybe they initiated. That's a sign that that's a freely given agreement. So we're not going to really go into the legal part about this, but I really think it's important to have this as a baseline because there are so many different definitions that you could go into in understanding consent. But I think this one is one we can build on because it's not just about whether or not this is legal consent or not. It's about how do I make this other people feel comfortable? How do I have a healthy relationship? And having that healthy relationship is far more important than just not committing a crime. So what I'm going to go into is a consent checklist. And I think this is a really great way to be like, okay, so is this person, is it clear? Is it coherent? Is it willing? Is it ongoing? So first off, clear consent. Consent is active. Someone has expressly said yes, or there's some body language that indicates maybe they pull you into them, or maybe they are excited. Whoever's initiating needs to make sure that that other person is voluntarily doing this. So it's obvious. It must be obvious. If they're kind of like sitting back in their chair and kind of like avoiding you like this, crossing their arms, that's kind of a sign that it's not clear. So you have to make sure that it's clear. If you can't tell by body language, it's important to use verbal language. So asking, do you feel comfortable? Is it okay? Are you fine? And so now we're going to go into coherence. So the person that you're initiating contact with has to be coherent, able to make a rational and reasonable decision. And this could be in play. It's important to know what's not coherent. So someone's not coherent when they're drunk, they're falling over drunk, or they're sleeping. Sleeping Beauty is a really great example, but I know it's going to ruin a lot of childhoods. One thing is that when someone is sleeping, they aren't coherent. So the prince, when he kissed Sleeping Beauty, that was not consensual because even though she may have liked it, she didn't. What if she didn't? We don't know. The prince didn't know if she would have liked it. They haven't seen each other in a while, so maybe she doesn't really like him. So that's a really important example of why it's important to be coherent, or maybe someone has a situation or a mental condition where they have different cognitive abilities and they're unable to make that rational, reasonable decision. So or maybe they're in a situation where they just got out of a car crash and they're really woozy from it. Some person is not able to make a rational, reasonable decision because their brain is in survival mode. So that's another thing. So another thing is it must be willing. So it's never given under pressure. So one thing is that if you go into, using the same example we had earlier of going into someone's room, if someone invites you into their room, initiating, that's a sign that it's willing. And you have to look in the enthusiasm in their voice. Are they excited? And another thing is, were they put under pressure by you? Maybe you were like, well, I showed you my room when you were at my house. Why can't I see your room? So that's a sign of pressure. Keep asking until they give in. Often happens with sex a lot of the time because the one partner who wants sex, it's okay to want to have sex. It's exciting. But the thing is, if you're constantly asking and saying, "Hey, what about now? Is it okay now? Do you think you feel comfortable next week?" That really just kind of pressures the person into doing something that they're not excited to do. So therefore, it's not willing. And another aspect to look at is ongoing consent. So ongoing consent is granted in the moment. So it's not necessarily, one thing is that if they agree to have sex with you yesterday, it may not mean they're okay with having sex tomorrow. And that's key to long-term relationships. Maybe if you knew this person for a long time, it doesn't mean that it's implied. And I think this is a really problematic issue because in the past, a lot of people used to think just because you're married, you could have sex with them whenever they want. They already consented by virtue of being married to you, but that's not the case. Even married folks or people in long-lasting relationships must ask for consent at every point because you know what happens is sometimes in a long-term relationship, today you're tired. You're so busy today and you just want to relax and take a break. So that's important to be able to have in a long-term relationship. Or maybe you had a surgery and or maybe you just plain don't want to today. Maybe you're angry at the person. You don't feel like you're not in the mood. So that's important to have, is that choice, regardless of your relationship status. And just because you're in a relationship does not mean that you have to have sex or you have to kiss or hold hands in the relationship. So just keep those things in mind in your relationship, is that just because of your relationship status or whatever you call the other person doesn't mean you're obligated to do anything you feel uncomfortable doing with your own body. So I hope this has been very informational for any of you who might not be so clear about consent. I actually put this little picture of a teacup because there's a really great video on YouTube called Consent is Like Tea. And I actually will link that video in the description below because I think that's another great example. In addition to the house, going to someone's house and asking to go into different rooms, that's kind of like what asking for consent is like. Drinking tea, you ask someone if they want to drink some tea. So I'll link that video down below if you want to see a different analogy that's really helpful. And another thing is that if you are in a relationship, our organization works with domestic violence survivors to make sure that they have services that they need to be able to feel safe and to be able to safety plan if they're in an abusive relationship. And in addition to the services I offer, which are educational, we also offer services related to shelter, guiding survivors through the legal system if they want to press charges. Getting a protection order is a big one that we help a lot of folks with. So feel free to call our 24-hour support line at 425-252-2873, and that's where you can find out more about our services. It's not an emergency line, so if you're just curious about if you are in an abusive relationship, you don't know quite yet, and you need some extra support, or you need to be redirected to different services from our organization, this is a great resource for you. And I'll also put some resources in the description below. Thank you all, and I really appreciate you, and I hope you stay safe during this really crazy time. Thank you. Bye-bye.